Hey guys, Alex here. So today I would like to talk about standard Othello tournament rules. As you embark on your journey in Othello, one good way to actually gain experience is to play tournaments. And even though you know the rules of the game, tournament rules may be slightly more complicated. Today I would like to share with you 10 common rules found in standard Othello tournaments. Hey, what's up guys? Today we're going to be talking about the standard Othello tournament rules. So today's topics are the master hand rule, making a move, a touch move, no distracting opponent rule, this flip error handling, illegal moves or disputes, accepting the position, unreadable position, time control rule, and definitely no reference materials allowed during a tournament. So over here we have a typical tournament setup in Othello. You have the Othello board, 2 boxes of discs, and also the chess clock with a preset time control. So in this game, for example, if I were playing black and my opponent is playing white, to start off the game, he would first tap on the clock to my side and press the play button. So my time starts to count down, and I'm then eligible to make a move. The first tournament rule that I like to share is the master hand rule. So for me, I'm right-handed, so typically I'll use my right hand to play. Rule number 2 is basically making a move. So how do you make a move? You pick up a disc from the board, place it on a square on the board that is a legal square, flip all the required discs based on the rules of the game, and once you've done flipping all the discs, you tap on the clock to stop your own time and to start your opponent's time to count down. Your opponent will then do the same. Rule number 3 in Othello is touch move. Traditionally in other chess type of board games, typically a touch move involves touching the piece. But in Othello, it's slightly different. In Othello, if you drop a disc on any square that is a legal move, you are required or committed to actually make that move. However, if it's not a legal move, you wouldn't be able to make that move. So, for example, if I were to touch this square, C3, with my disc, I would then be committed to playing this move. Similarly, even without the disc, if I were to use my fingers to actually touch any of the legal squares that I could play to, I would then be also required to play the move. So that brings the point of rule number 4. So rule number 4 is basically no distracting opponents. So you shouldn't be unnecessarily dropping your discs all over the board that are illegal positions, or you shouldn't be making too many hand gestures that are covering the board that obstructs your opponent from visualization and also reading the game. Rule number 5 is this flip error. So in this case, if your opponent were to play a move to D2, he is actually required to flip 1, 2, 3 discs in the vertical direction and also 1 more disc in the diagonal direction based on the rules of the game. In the event that he only flips 1, 2, 3 discs in the vertical direction and taps the clock and hands the move back to you, you basically have to point out your opponent's disc flip error by gesturing to the disc that he did not flip and let him know. But first of all, you should always tap your clock to stop the time. If he agrees, he would then flip the disc and then tap back his clock to complete his move again. And if you agree, the game can then proceed. The 6th rule that I like to talk about is illegal moves and disputes. So if I were playing black right now, and if I were to make a move somewhere along F6 for example, which isn't a legal move, and I tap back the clock, that would basically be an illegal move. And my opponent should then dispute and question me on why have I done that. If both parties cannot come to an agreement, the resolution should be sought via the tournament director by raising your hand. Rule number 7 is accepting the position. So let's say if I were playing black right now, and I were to play this move and flip 1, 2 discs that I'm supposed to flip, and 1 more extra disc that I was not supposed to flip, and I tap the clock. If my opponent playing white did not spot the error and continues to make the next legal move, say to F5 and flip the required disc that he has to, and taps the clock and hands the move back to me, he is said to have accepted the position
and there will not be any more disputes pertaining to this misflip error that I have made. So the game will then proceed as per normal from here. Rule number 8 is unreadable position. Even though we are all human and not machine-like, we should still try as much as possible to flip the disc and ensure that the disc that we flip still remain relatively within each box. Assuming if my opponent were to play this move over here and flip 1, 2, 3, 4 disc and somehow moves the disc way too much and proceeds to tap the clock, I have every right to actually tap the clock to stop the time and inform my opponent that this is an unreadable position and he should adjust the disc such that it remains as a reasonably readable position. So he would then have to adjust the disc back as per normal based on your agreement that the original position was like so, and then tap the clock using his time to complete the position. You can then proceed to make your next move.
So since time control is one of the most complex rules, I've prepared this illustration to try to explain how it works. So consider this Othello match that is ending between Pooh and Yoshi. So Pooh has 1 minute 30 seconds on the clock, and Yoshi unfortunately only has 1 second on the clock. The below table tabulates the different scenarios. So given that Yoshi only has 1 second, he's surely to time out regardless of what kind of moves he tried to play at this position. So the first scenario is when Yoshi times out. When he times out, Pooh is guaranteed at least a win of 33-31 regardless of the board position. And the second outcome is also that Yoshi is given additional 2 minutes to complete the game. The next event is that if Yoshi completes the game in the given 2 minutes, and if Yoshi has 31 or more discs on the board, the final result, regardless of that position, would be Pooh winning 33-31 as the final result. In the second scenario, similarly Yoshi also times out and is given additional 2 minutes, and Yoshi completes the game in the given 2 minutes. But in this case, Yoshi has 30 or less discs on the board. For example, if he only had 21 discs on the board, the final result is to the favor of Pooh, who didn't time out first. So the final score that would be reported would be 43-21 as Pooh's victory. In the third scenario, Yoshi has timed out again. Pooh is guaranteed at least a win of 33-31, and Yoshi is also given additional 2 minutes. But in this scenario, Yoshi also uses up the additional 2 minutes and times out again. So over here, the board position is irrelevant, and Pooh would be declared as the winner of the match by a margin of 64-0. So finally, in the fourth scenario, which is usually unlikely, but it's there to indicate as a guideline, if Yoshi times out first, and Pooh is guaranteed at least a win of 33-31, and Yoshi is given additional 2 minutes to complete the game, and somehow the next event that follows is Pooh times out twice, using a total of 3 minutes and 30 seconds, meaning 1 minute and 30 seconds on his clock, and the additional 2 minutes that Pooh is given if he times out, before Yoshi uses 2 minutes and 1 second, meaning if Yoshi still has some time on the clock, including the additional 2 minutes, the board position would then be irrelevant, and Pooh would then lose 0-64. So this is usually an unlikely scenario because given that the fact that Yoshi has timed out first, the opponent, who is Pooh, should be guaranteed at least a win of 33-31. There is no excuse for him to actually run out of time in that scenario. So in the unlikely scenario that somehow Pooh times out twice, even though Yoshi timed out once before him, Pooh would then lose 0-64. Rule number 10 is no reference materials allowed. So basically, during the match, you are not allowed to reference any written materials of any sort, and certainly no Othello software on your mobile phone should be consulted during the match. Finally, I would like to go into some bonus content, which is tournament setup. Typically, most Othello tournaments are run in n number of rounds of Swiss pairing or round-robin system. After completing the tournament, an individual final ranking list, or IFRL, is typically published. So I like to go over some Singapore tournaments, the major Japanese tournament, which is Meijin Sen, that is open to foreigners, and the World Othello Championship system. So for the first one, we have the Singapore Blitz Open, which is typically a 7-round Swiss system with a 5 minutes time control, with no semifinals, finals, or any sort of tiebreaker of sort. Next is the Singapore Open, which is almost like a bi-monthly tournament in Singapore. We also run it on a 7-round Swiss system, 20 minutes time control, and basically no semi-finals and finals. It's just a pure Swiss pairing tournament. If we run the same tournament online, we usually cut back the time control by 5 minutes, which is usually the buffer that is required for players to make their disc flips on the board. But online, as you don't need to flip any discs, we usually cut back the time for its equivalent. So next up, we have the Singapore National Othello Championship, which is usually the biggest tournament in Singapore. Usually you have a 6-round Swiss pairing plus a best of 1 semi-finals and final games. So typically in the Swiss pairing preliminary rounds of 6-round Swiss, you would have 20 minutes each round, and so as the semi-finals and the finals. For the semi-finals and finals, typically we would take the first rank, the top rank of the individual final ranking list to play against rank number 4. And rank number 2 will then be paired with rank number 3. Usually for each semi-final, the higher rank player will get to choose color or the right to a draw win, as it's just a best of 1 game. So similarly for the finals and also the third, fourth match, it would be the same rule. The higher rank person of each pair in the IFRL would have the right to choose. So finally, we have the Singapore Othello Masters Series tournament, which is basically a 7 rounds round robin because it's just an invitational to the top 8 performing players of that year. The time control is 20 minutes and there are no semifinals and finals. Let's move on to the Japanese Meijin-sen, which is one of the largest tournaments of Japan, and it's one of the 3 major tournaments. So usually they have Meijin, Oza, and also their All Japan tournament to determine their 3 representatives from Japan. So as Japan is famously known to have so many former world champions, you would imagine that the challenge of winning this tournament is almost equally, if not higher, than the World Othello Championship. So basically they run on a 7 rounds knockout Swiss pairing system. For the initial rounds, you would expect to have 25 minutes time control, and in the semifinals and finals, you would expect maybe 5 minutes more each. Typically, they run their tournaments, because their tournament is usually maybe 128 to 200 men tournament that are qualified from all over Japan. At least for the last tournament that I've been to, they typically split their participants into groups. So for example, in the semifinals, you might have the Group A champion versus the Group B champion, and then the Group C versus the Group D. And I believe they also follow the same type of rule in terms of the higher ranked player choosing the color or the right to draw win. Now we move on to the World Othello Championship. The World Othello Championship is typically run over 3 days. The first 2 days of which you would actually play a total of 13 rounds Swiss pairing, and that time control will be 30 minutes. If you're lucky enough to somehow get into the playoff and finally the best of 3 semi-final or final stage in the third day, the semi-final will feature 35 minutes for each player each game and 40 minutes for the finals. So similarly over here, usually the top ranked player is paired with the 4th ranked player and the 2nd ranked player is paired with the 3rd ranked player. So for the tiebreaker or the color of choice, typically the top ranked player will get to choose the color of choice in his first game. And the tiebreaker would then be the number of points. So assuming the rank 1 player actually beats the rank 4 player in the first 2 games, and the points would be 2-0, there would not be a third game being played. If during the semi-final, the first 2 games result in 1 win each, the points will be 1-1 and a third game will be played. And if the third game comes up to a draw, they will then see the total discount. Both players would have a total points of 1.5 each. Then they will then see the discount, the total discount, assuming if rank 1 has won rank 4 by maybe 40 to 24 in the first game, but lost to rank 4 in the second game, maybe of a margin of 25 to 39, for example, rank 1 player would then actually advance through the semi-final by the rule of the tiebreaker on discount. Assuming if game 1 was won by rank 1 player 40 to 24 and game 2 rank 4 player actually won in the exact identical discount of 40 to 24 back against rank 1 player, the IFRL rank would then be consulted, which means the rank 1 player would eventually get through to the finals. So definitely fighting for the best ranking in the Swiss pairing would also matter. So with that, I hope you now have a better understanding of typical Othello tournament rules. Thank you very much for watching this video.